So here we're going to cover a little trick you can learn with a fully diminished seventh chord and resolution. And we're also going to start extending past the one chord we've used in the previous episodes. If you haven't watched those, and if you don't know these things, I'm going to list it again. Chromatic harmony, in key, all minor and major keys, borrowed chords, all that kind of stuff. Don't even watch this because it's not going to make sense. And I'm just being honest on that aspect. So and remember, this is not the only way to chromatically modulate. This is just one trick out of a whole ton, especially when we start thinking about composers like Wagner and those late Romantic era guys. There's so many tricks they have up their sleeves too. And that's why when people always assume they know everything about functional harmony, it's actually a vastly huge topic, especially in that era. And I'd say for the film guys too, who want to get into that, if they want to learn to, I use these kind of tricks all the time, taking very typical kind of chromatic modulation to a different key, and very, very typical film score kind of moves you might use to get that kind of sound. So for specific genres, that's not every film genre. But anyway, if you want to up your harmonic vocabulary, you might want to start considering stuff like this. So if we take a fully diminished seventh chord, there's actually, if you look at everything as a leading tone, which we're going to do in here, it's the same chord we used in the previous episodes. But now we're not going to look at the enharmonic spellings. We're just going to look at everything as a leading tone, every tone in here. So first off, the fully diminished seventh chord can only really be the same set of notes done 3 times. If you go up chromatically like this, well, we're at the repeat now. We're using the same notes as you would starting on a C. So if you start on an E, it's the same notes as a C sharp, fully diminished seventh. So, but in different keys, it's spelled differently. So here's the trick. There's actually 8 resolutions. If you look at everything as a leading tone, like I said before, let's take that. Well, the F sharp is the leading tone to a G. Okay, we're just gonna keep inverting this chord. Any form of G, G major or minor, G minor, G major. Invert that same diminished chord starting on the A. Look at it as a leading tone. Well, what's a half step up? A B flat. So B flat minor or B flat major. You don't even need to know how to write it within key this way, okay? And oftentimes you won't because it's part of the enharmonic process. So invert that again on the C. Well, the leading tone up a half step is that D flat or C sharp, whatever you want to call it, okay? Invert this chord again on the E flat. Well, up a half step is an E minor or E major. So there's 8 resolutions to this shape, okay, enharmonic shape. So now as an experiment, let's go through the chords that ecantonicize the G, E major, and a B flat. Play those chords in a row like that. You know, it sounds like it's a cool effect, but it doesn't sound connected. Now if we connect it with that one common fully diminished chord, 7th chord, see what happens? It sounds connected all of a sudden, those chord changes. So running through these resolutions, doing that same sequence, there's something you could... We could do little sequences like that, using a little bit of chromaticism in the upper voice. Okay, we're just connecting them with that same fully diminished 7th chord. And then this is what we're going to talk about later. Well, later in the series is that any first inversion chord can be looked at as a temporary Neapolitan 6th chord. My apologies. I had a little brain meltdown. That B flat in first inversion naturally goes to that E dominant chord, okay? But that's a temporary shift, and this is something Wagner used to do too, but we're going to talk about that later. I'm getting way ahead of myself. So what I would start doing is taking all the 3 possible diminished chords and playing through the resolutions, okay? And just playing through them and writing them out too. I always say play through, but you should write everything out. Well, write them out because you shouldn't rely just on keyboard skills. I'm not a keyboard player. I don't want great keyboard skills. What we're gonna do here now is I've created a chain sequence going to B flat minor, which we did in the previous episodes using one chord move. Now we're going to use a series of diminished chords and their resolutions via the leading tone concept, okay? It's still an enharmonic process, just like we did before, where we had this shared common chord between, enharmonic common chord between G as a borrowed 7 and then naturally occurring as a 7 chord in B flat minor, the same set of notes, enharmonic. So by using this, well, let's just play through the sequence first. We'll still go to B flat minor. Okay, so let's see what's going on here. Okay, you get G major, that F sharp diminished 7th. That's the leading tone. The A is the leading tone to the B flat minor chord. Now you could literally just move to a diminished chord downward like that. That E diminished is a leading tone to A flat major. The D diminished, just moving it down again to another diminished chord, is the leading tone to an F sharp major chord or G flat. In this case, since we're in B flat minor, it has to be G flat. Then I just moved it down. Consider that the pivot point, the 6th chord, 6, 2, 5, 1. Okay? So notice from any chord you're at, you can move down a half step to a diminished chord and resolve it again to a chord that it might act as a leading tone. So let's play this sequence in root position. That A goes to that B flat minor. That G goes to that A flat. That F goes to the G flat major. Okay. Which is the 6th chord of B flat minor. Then I went to a half diminished, 2, 5, 1. Okay. However, it's voiced in a way where the bass is continuously moving down chromatically via inversions up until we start approaching that B flat minor key. Then we start moving, then the bass starts moving a little bit more typically. That's what we're doing. So doing such things and produces a highly chromatic modulation. All this is a result of knowing how to resolve a diminished chord like a leading tone, okay? Regardless of inversion. So here's what you really need to practice. Remember, there's 3 ways you can form a fully diminished 7th chord. So if you look at that in 8 possible different resolutions of a fully diminished 7th chord, that's 24 resolutions. So that's a lot of stuff to memorize, and we're just on one chromatic modulation move, okay? So you might do all kinds of, just give yourself all kinds of exercises on resolving these chords. And the better you get at it, you might even take stuff like going from minor to relative major in a chromatic way. Okay, from C minor to E flat major, the relative major, okay? Just try doing stuff like that in a chromatic fashion like that, using diminished chords, fully diminished 7th chords, sorry. And later on, we're going to see one of the part of the Wagner style is actually to resolve to another dissonance, still resolving with that leading tone thinking to maybe a dominant chord with like the B flat with the flat 7. So you might do a sequence like this. Using dominant ninths and dominant flat ninths and stuff. That's part of what gave him his sound, is it's never quite resolved. So we'll find that you could tonicize the same chord, but using the leading tone to a dominant flat 9 chord instead of just the basic triad. This is part of what gave that late Romantic era its sound. So we're not going to cover this right now because it's a little bit more advanced, but it kind of leaves you in a state of you don't feel resolved yet. But first you need to learn these basic chromatic moves. And so you start looking at that fully diminished seventh chord, and remember you could form it 3 times as a possible leading tone, thinking of it that way, and then which means it could resolve up a half step to any major or minor chord. That's your first job. And remember, this gives you 8 possible resolutions, and then you have to multiply that by how many times a fully diminished seventh chord can occur enharmonically, just the sound of it. And those also have 8 different resolutions, like again leading to 24 possible resolutions out of the 3 enharmonically forming fully diminished seventh chords. So that's a lot to memorize. So that's why I'd say just start adding small moves at a time. So you can use this trick of looking at every tone of that diminished chord as a leading tone to a possible new root, but you should still know how to spell that diminished chord within that key. This is not a substitute for that. So, and sometimes you're not going to have that happen because you're shifting from one key to the next, and it may be spelled like it was in the last key. That's why sometimes when people look at these scores like Wagner and just late romantic eras, they get a little confused with these kind of moves because they're not sure where it belongs, that chord. They don't see the enharmonic connection. You see how far you can actually modulate and how distantly you can with just a few moves with just this one trick. And this is just one trick. And I would say even if you're a media composer, don't disregard it, because I've used this many times as a modulation device, just so there's a connection between the 2 keys that are very remote, but you need to jump, for some reason you need to jump to that remote key. It may be a better key for like a horn line or something, I don't know. Just thinking in terms like that. This is a trick you can use that will get you there very quick without it sounding disjunct and all of a sudden.